Hi, thank you very much everyone watching this video. This is Tatasha voice. It conveys an analytic information of personal opinion is kind on the political, economic and social issues prevailing in Ethiopia using a different languages on daily basis from Monday to Friday. And on Monday, Consumer language is used on Tuesday Amharic language, on Wednesday English language, on Thursday Consumer language again, and on Friday it is a little bit different, wherein other languages other than those mentioned will be used to convey message. You can find my videos on my own Facebook timeline, Tatasha Kasido, and also on my YouTube channel that is entitled Tatasha Complex. Today, I am here to speak on the subject of the political reform that is currently underway in the politics of Ethiopia. And it is in the knowledge of everyone that there is a remarkable political reform that is run in the country under the leadership of His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed. That reform is a long-awaited reform by the Ethiopian population. The Ethiopian population has paid great sacrifice to promote this reform. The people in general, particularly the terror in Oromia Fano, in Amara, Zarma, in Guragi, and other youth groups in different ethnic groups of the country has played a great role to promote that reform. And the role of the internal reformists from within EPRDF itself is also noticeable. The likes of Lema Meketsal, the likes of today's Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Demeke Mukono, Gado Andargacho, all this have played a great role in bringing the 2 days remarkable reform in the country that has attracted the attention of both international and national communities. Ethiopian people become hopeful of their future because of the reform. The PRDF has controlled everything in the country over the last 27 years. The politics has been ethnicized. The economy has been secured by EPRDF and EPRDF investors and businessmen and women. The social setup even was mired in the malady due to EPRDF's implementation of wrong social policies. That is why the population of Ethiopia indifferently motivated to bring change. And the resistance of EPRDF not to bring change has led the country's population to pay, sacrifices in terms of, property damage, in terms of, human life is lost, and in terms of different damages and distractions. But finally, the reform comes into existence, and Dr. Abiy has took the leadership of the reform period. So far, the reform went very nice. So there are inconveniences and there are problems. It is expected. You cannot run a reform without problem. You cannot run a reform, in the country wherein 27 years of different problems accumulated. Problems in the implementation of the reform is expected as a normal, but sometimes there are I think that goes beyond a normal status that needs to be contained also. Then with the reform, the Prime Minister's leadership quality is very silent. The way he has managed the diplomacy with African countries, especially those uh, that are in the Horn, in the East Africa, the way he approached the Arabian countries, the way he approached, Europeans, the way he approached the American government, all this needs to be appreciated. Needs to be appreciated. Internally, people of Ethiopia are, very hopeful of the reform. That is a very good thing. The way the Prime Minister managed to rearrange the military of the country that was previously, arranged based on the ethnicity is also remarkable. The way he introduced it, changes into the economy to solve the problems of foreign exchange is also something that needs to be appreciated. The way he has also introduced change into the cabinet arrangement, in the federal offices is also, a good thing. For example, the way he managed to form a new ministry office, that is a peace or salam office, is salam minister, is something innovative. The national consensus, among the Ethiopian people is something that needs to be mentioned, meaningfully. But that does not mean that the reforms are going without, threats. There are threats, there are challenges in the face of the reform. And if those threats and challenges are not taken seriously, honestly speaking, the end result of the reform will never ever be met. Therefore, in my today's speech, I want to focus on the challenge that the reformist group, should take care of while moving forward. One of the major challenges that I saw so far in the reform move is the lack of comprehensiveness. The lack of, implementation coverage of the reform agendas all over the country. It lacks inclusiveness. And for me, I see the reform implementation in three categories. One, the reform that is being implemented in Addis Ababa, in Amhara, in Oromo, and in Somali are the same, categorized first in first category. The second reform is the reform that is going on in Tigray, second category. The third category is a reform that is going in the rest regions and parts of the country. For instance, a reform that is running in South Ethiopia, in Afar region, in Benishangul Gumuz region, in Harare region, in Dirdawa city administration, in Gambella, that reform makes a third category for me. Therefore, there are three categories of the reform kind. The reform that is being underway in Addis Ababa, the capital city, in Amhara, in Oromo, and in Somali, is different in its characteristics, is different in its measures, is different in its seriousness, is different in its roots. And for me, it is a real reform that is running there in these regions. When you look into the reform moves in Oromia region under the leadership of Lama Magarsa, who is undisputed leader, very remarkable. the way he is ensuring accountability, the way he is restructuring and rearranging the offices, the way he rearranging the cabinet from the region right to the root level, cabinet level. That it is remarkable. In Somali region, the same thing is going. The hand of Dr. Abiy, the Prime Minister, goes long to the Somali region and organized things there. And he appointed the very seditious president for the region, Mustafa. He is undertaking. He is a very knowledgeable and very committed, very sagacious after all, and he is undertaking a very a good reform in the region, depending upon knowledge, depending upon commitment, depending upon the potential political opportunities and political threats. He is introducing reform into the economic move of the region that was previously being dominated by the contraband lines of the PRDF, old men and women. Therefore, the reform in Somali region, in one way or in another way, is very silent and remarkable. And if the reform moves in that speed, beyond the shadow of any doubt, the effect will be positive. The same thing is true in Oromia. In Amara, the same thing is going on. The leadership of Getto Undergraduate, with the consult of the Magamukono from the federal government, the intellects in and outside the country, the intellects of Amara, are handling the region's problems in some way that is very remarkable, that can promote something positive results. In Addis Ababa, the same thing. Under the leadership of Takali Uma, good things, investigations into the housing projects, investigations into the bounded areas, MPT bounded areas in the center of the city. All this, the service provision improvement in the city are running very nice, despite there are problems that are currently unfolding in relation to identity card provision for the citizens living in the city. That is something that needs to be curiously and carefully seen. I don't want to get into that. But the reform in general there is very good. This is what we call a reform. And I want to appreciate personally the reformist groups move there. And the second category is reform in Tigray. And in Tigray, unfortunately, the vast majority of EPRDF elites were Tigrayans, leaders from Tigray. Now, because the reformist group won over EPRDF old elites, the likes of Abai Zahaye, Sabahat Naka, Siju Masfen, all those old elites of EPRDF retreated back to Tigray, and they are sitting there. And the reform in the sense of Dr. Abiy and his comrades' idea is not prevailing there in Tigray. All the PRDF elites are there, and they have their own reform agendas, and that is of a different kind from that of the reformists in the palace in our Kilo. Therefore, the reform in Tigray is a little bit different from the general reform that is going on in the party that I have already mentioned. The third category of the reform is in South, Benshangul, Afar, Gambela, and then Dardawa regions. The reform in these regions, that reform cannot be said in no reform. The Prime Minister and his reformist comrades fail to send uniformly, equalize over the country. Their focus is on some issues and their focus is on some parts of the country. And that is the problem and the main challenge for me. For example, in South, you can take Southern region as an example, and in South there is no reform at all. Right from the regional office up to the lower level of the administrative units, there is no reform. If there is reform, it is only a replacement of the region's president, Dalke, with Million Matheus. That is not a reform for me. The others are there. And that is not a mistake. They can be there. No one hates them personally, but they should be there with a different mentality, with a reform mentality. But they are not there with a reform mentality. Instead, they are, in a business of lingering the legacy of PRDF. They are still suffocating the population. Another thing is that, the population in the South are very hopeful of the reform. They expected, the reform to bring, a change, a change that the people were demanding over, many years. The Prime Minister too promised to the population that a change will come, but that change nowhere in sight. It is those EPRDF old cadres who changed their face and coming from the back of the room saying we are reformists. They are the one who speaks the reform language of the Prime Minister without not truly changed their mentality. In South, still, for example, when you go to Konso, there is still a problem. When you go to Abamjit, there is still a problem. When you go to, Gova, there is still a problem. When you go to Amaro, there is still a problem. When you go to Burjit, there is still a problem. And as I talk now, in Konso, there is no government. And now it approaches to 4 years that the government is missing there. Currently, in Gurake, there is bloodshed. The problem is that there is no reform. In Benshangul Gum, the same story is true. In Gambela, the same story is true. And actually, that of Gambela is of a little bit a different story, in that the Prime Minister sent his hand to make things onto the right track. But in South, he is silent. His reformist group is silent. They give the old EPRDF cadres to play dumb with the population. They assume that the population are idiots and that the population don't know anything. That is, now the people started to look the reform with suspicious mind. No? There are many who started to perceive that reform is a superficial reform, tricky reform. Therefore, a reform in this, in Dwadawa, the reform in Afar, the reform in those regions are not reforms. Rather, the status quo are sustained by the EPRDF, old men and women. Therefore, the reformist group needs to be free of myopia. They have to send their eyes uniformly all over the country if true reform is to be established. Without establishing reform in those regions, in the regions like Afar, in the regions like South region, that is a very diversified region in the country, it will be very difficult to have a complete reform in the country. Therefore, this is the lack of inclusiveness in the reform is number one challenge. Another challenge is the challenge that is posed by the old EPRDF men and women. Those EPRDF men and women, they have everything of a financial kind. They have the finance, they have the money, they have the network. Investors in the country, most of them are intertwined with the old EPRDF theft network. Therefore, they are using that network of investors, they are using that network of cadres, they are using that network of a different kind to make turbulence in the country, to restore back their time of dominance again. And that is, that needs to be, taken seriously by the reformist group. In those regions where I said there is no reform, the cadres are, serving, both sides. They are serving the reformist group, and they are also serving their old network, their old system. But the ultimate goal is that to take over the reformist group. That actually seems impossible, but why? Because of that, why even one man's life is to be lost? They are, they are doing towards, turbulences that, take away the life of many. For example, in Gurage. That is why. So why? They are to be tolerated to the extent that they make towards the loss of life. The reformist group should take care of the old EPRDF cadres. Most of them are criminalists. The investors with them, the investors that makes to their group are criminalists. Therefore, the government has to be, strong enough in, in realizing accountability and realizing rule of law to, to promote, a change of positive kind in the country. Another thing is institutions, especially the security institutions, police institutions at the low level administrative units. Those, old EPRDF men and women are now using the policemen, are using those security apparatuses to make turbulences in this, regions wherein the reform is too loose. Therefore, the reformists should, strengthen the institutional capacity. The reform should, be a complete right from the top down and down to top. Therefore, no one can interfere into it and use the security apparatus for the sake of a personal interest. And my fear ahead, in the time ahead, is there will be, a technique by the old EPRDF men and women to use, even the terrorist group in the like Al-Shabaab Al Qaeda, you know, in the Horn of Africa, especially not Al Qaeda, but Al Shabaab, and maybe others, to make turbulence. Other than the internal, I mean, other than the internal, turbulence they can use even, external terrorist group to make chaos in the country. They can also form another group, terrorist group, and now, it is said Onag, it is said Kero, while Onag is not, in affirmative of the group that is called Onag, that causes problem. Kero arrangement is not affirmative to the group that calls itself Kero in the country, but the problems are caused by those groups. Therefore, there can be, for me, there is a making of a terrorist group that calls itself, ONG, that calls itself a Jeto, that calls itself, a Kero, while the truth is not. Therefore, the reformist group should consider all these external and internal threats and challenges to the reform, and should run the reform as per the interest of the public. Unless and otherwise, that the reform will lose the public, acceptance. Now the people, become loyal, become, advocative of the reform. That is because the reform has showed hope for the society, for the people. It does not mean that the public gave, loyalty, that people gave acceptance for the reform because the reform has solved problems for the Ethiopian population, let alone within 7 months. Ethiopian population's problem cannot be solved within 70 years. The reason why the population advocates the reform is only because the reform has already, showed a sort of hope for the Ethiopian population. Therefore, the reformist group should use that opportunity. Unless and otherwise, things will be out of their control, and then the country will be destabilized, and then problems will be created on the top of a problem, on the top of problem will be created, and that is, that is a challenge and the threat that the reformist groups have in face of their reform move. This is all about what I have today. Have a nice time, guys.